Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with another video. I wasn't anticipating making another video about this X-23 Wolverine Mantle topic, but I guess I am. And I actually want to thank Trevor White, who just left a very interesting question, right? So this is the comment section of the last video I made about this, which is, the difference between a mantle holder and an iconic character, right? Which is, of course, further diving into the difference between X-23 and Wolverine, right? And how there will always be one Wolverine in that slogan, right? So let me bring the question into frame, right? So Trevor, about 8 minutes ago, says, "So you prefer the status quo not changing?" And I responded saying that it's more about how it changes. So instead of being the little, grumpy critic that I typically am, let me give an example of where I think that the mantle being passed on actually was done very well, right? And that is actually one of my favorite cartoons of the late 1990s, which is Batman Beyond. I absolutely love that cartoon. Part of me wishes it had gone on a season or two longer, and then a part of me thinks, I think 2 seasons was just enough, because then a show goes on too long, and it starts to become sort of a parody of itself if it runs too long. But I think that Batman Beyond is probably one of the best examples of how to move a mantle on right, to put the mantle on a different person while still showing respect to the original owner, right? So if you've never seen Batman Beyond, I assume if you're on this channel, you've seen it or you've heard of it, or perhaps you've read the comic version. I actually find the cartoon to be very superior to the comic that eventually it spawned. But for those who don't know, basically the story of Batman Beyond, I think, was supposed to be taking place in 2017. It was the future. It was considered the future at the time. Now the future is the past. But it takes place in the future where Batman hasn't been around for years and crime in general has skyrocketed and the Joker gang is running around and the world, or at least Gotham City, needs a Batman. So what happens is that a young ex-delinquent known as Terry McGinnis, through a variety of circumstances. I would say the show starts out pretty slow, but it's because it's trying to sort of, build up the story, right? But through a, contrivance of plot, right? His father dying and then him wanting to get vengeance and he happens to find the Batcave, all this other stuff. Terry finds out that the, old secluded billionaire Bruce Wayne was actually Batman, right? And because Bruce is old now, right? He stopped crime fighting decades ago when he had a heart attack in the middle of a fight, more or less, and he's forced to grab a gun and threaten to use it to save himself, right? Bruce has become old and bitter, and he can't physically go out and go back and be Batman anymore, right? And he's become very, very much, the angry, cynical old man who thinks that all of his efforts ultimately were for naught, right? So, because of the fact that Gotham City still needs a Batman, right, and through plot, uh, contrivance, other members of the Bat family like Nightwing or Huntress or Black Canary either have fallen out with Bruce, Nightwing in particular, or characters like Tim Drake have been killed or otherwise not available, right? And in particular, Barbara Gordon, who's now an older woman, is now Commissioner Gordon. But unlike her father, she's actually opposed to what Bruce and now Terry does, right? So she actually works as an antagonist, right, pursuing them instead of helping them out as her father Jim Gordon once did, right? So through circumstances, Terry becomes Batman, and he is mentored by the original Batman. And a constant theme throughout the 2 seasons is the fact that Terry is a successor, but he's never the original, and he never could be. But both characters are treated with respect. For example, Terry does grow into the role of Batman to the point of developing his own deep, stern Bat voice, right, which is distinct from his normal speaking voice. I think voice actor Will Friedle did a great job between uh, vocally creating a difference between Terry, the teenager, and Batman, right? And the thing is that while Terry is a Batman, right, it's understood by both the audience and by the character himself that he will never be the Batman. There are several episodes that touch upon that. In fact, there's one episode where I think it's Spellbinder, I think it is. He's more or less a scarecrow, psychological terror type character. He tries to break Bruce's mind. But the mistake Spellbinder makes is that when he's in Bruce's head, he keeps referring to Bruce as Bruce, right? So Bruce's thoughts are referring to him by his first name. And at the end of the episode, when Terry asks, it's like, how did you know you weren't going crazy? Bruce explains that he never refers to himself as Bruce in his own mind. And then when Terry asks, well, what do you call yourself in your own head? Right? Bruce just gives him a look, and then Terry dips into his own Batman voice, and he goes, "That's my name now." And Bruce is like, "Tell that to my subconscious," right? Batman Beyond, in my opinion, at least the TV show, I can't speak too much for the comics. I read a few issues and wasn't terribly impressed. But for the TV show, it showed both respect. It showed respect to both characters, while clearly establishing that one was the original, one was the mentor, and the other is the student, the other is the successor. It never gives the impression that it's trying to convince you that Bruce Wayne was never Batman, and the only Batman, the only valid, true Batman is Terry, right? Terry's even referred to in even promotional materials as Batman Beyond or the Batman of the future, right? It makes it clear that while he's a Batman, he's not the Batman. Even the way he goes about fighting crime. For example, he tends to talk a lot in battle, right, and taunt his opponents. Not something Bruce was typically known for, right? Even his fighting style is different, using a lot more, street fighting than necessarily uh, strict martial arts, right? And because he's not as physically large, at least at the time of the series. By the time the epilogue episode comes, Terry's like in his 30s and he's freaking huge. But since the bulk of the story takes place with him as a teenager, he's shown to be very fit and athletic, but certainly not the size Bruce was. Bruce is built like a pro wrestler in most uh, depictions of him, right? So even his fighting style is different. It's much more acrobatic. It's much dirtier than Bruce's ever was. Probably closer to say Nightwing in the acrobatics department than say Bruce in his much more strict, karate judo sort of style. An interesting thing is that because Terry is fairly new and young and to everything, Terry gets his butt kicked all the time, right? It takes a decent amount of time into the series for Terry to start sort of winning fights on his own without Bruce's advice or interference, right? Bruce, throughout that series, because of his age, ends up playing the sort of mission control, right? Very similar to, say, what Barbara did as Oracle, because when she was Oracle, she was paralyzed. She couldn't go out and fight crime, right? So I actually think that Batman Beyond is one of the best examples of how to move a mantle on to another person with respect both for the newer character, the younger character. One second. As I was saying, it showed great respect to both the original character of Bruce and the new character of Terry. And it actually did a very good job, even with its villains, of balancing out, um, creating new characters that were sort of in the vein of or the archetype of certain Batman villains. For example, Terry gets his own Catwoman. I think her name is 10 or something, right? So he has this very Catwoman-esque relationship with her. There's Spellbinder, who's pretty much a new version of Scarecrow, and then there's of course classic characters who make an appearance, such as Mr. Freeze in a terribly heartbreaking episode, right? Which really highlights the hopelessness of the situation he's in, right? It also brings him back. It brings back Joker, and of course, throughout the series, there's a street gang that literally molded themselves after the image of Joker. But then it also has a lot of its own original characters, in particular Ink, who's one of the I mean one of the most terrifying characters I think I've ever seen in a kid's cartoon. But there's Ink, there's Kuare, who's literally a blue-skinned assassin. There's what's his name, Mad Stan. Then of course there's Blight, who's this like radioactive skeleton man, right? He's what's his name? Thanks. He's in his civilian form. He's Derek Powers, and he's the man responsible for the death of Terry's dad, right? So there's a lot of similarities to classic villains, but there's also a lot of room for new original villains, right? I think that Batman Beyond did a great job overall of balancing the past and the present, right? And tying those threads together in a respectful way. The only thing I ever really had an issue with that show was the epilogue revealing through more plot contrivance that Terry is Bruce's biological son, right? Apparently, this came about because they realized that his design, right, him having black hair, and the rest of his family having either brown or red hair didn't make sense. So like, oh, he's actually Bruce's kid because Cadmus collected Bruce's blood or something. Yeah, I didn't agree with that. I much prefer that the relationship between Terry and Bruce be that of a son figure and a father figure, right? Than necessarily them being father and son. But that's just me, right? So I think that's probably one of the best examples I can think of when it comes to the mantle being passed on in a way that's respectful to both characters, because it doesn't try to erase Bruce, and it doesn't try to make Terry, Bruce Wayne light, right? There's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences. There's mentorship on both sides, right? But there's respect for both characters, and there's respect for the mantle, right? Terry's role as Batman is to keep Batman alive. Gotham still needs a Batman. The original one can't do it. All the other people who, from his generation, right, who could have done it are for one reason or another not available. So here's your last shot, right? This scrappy street kid, who at first wants his own vengeance, but then uh, sincerely in his own right becomes a hero, right? So again, as I've stated several times, that's one of the best examples I think of moving a mantle on from one character to another and not maintaining the status quo with respect. And I think that there was another uh, question, or right. So uh, Trevor also said, I'm guessing you hate Mayday Parker or Dick Grayson as Batman. Well, here's the thing. I can't speak to Mayday Parker because I don't read a lot of Spider-Man. So I can't speak to that. But Dick Grayson is Batman. Again, if I remember correctly, he became Batman, or at least one of the instances he became Batman, was during the Batman RIP storyline, in which Bruce was presumed dead. Right? It's either RIP or Batman goes to hell, one of those, right? But the general idea is that Bruce is again presumed to be dead, and they can't let the criminals know that Batman is dead, right? So Dick Grayson, because he's more or less Bruce's first son, right, takes on the mantle. I have no issue in that instance because again, it makes sense in context, And ultimately, it's temporary. When Bruce comes back, because eventually Bruce is going to come back, right? He gives the mantle back, even explaining that he doesn't like being Batman, if I remember correctly, because it's not his role, right? He doesn't do things the way Bruce does, right? They established that ages ago when him and Bruce had that falling out as uh, Dick became a young man, right? Robin's reckoning and all that, right? Dick is not Bruce. He's not Bruce Wayne Jr. He's not Bruce Wayne Light. He's Dick Grayson. He's his own man, right? He has his own parents. He has his own way of doing things. Is he Bruce's son? Yes. Is he Bruce's clone? No. That's in part what Robin's Reckoning was all about, right? Both in the cartoons and in the comics, was about him being his own man, breaking away from the way Bruce does things and the way Bruce lives his life. And Bruce, in time, came to accept that. So if we're talking about Dick Grayson, then yeah, again, that's a situation where it made sense in context. And the moment Bruce Wayne was back, so was the mantle of Batman onto him. And Dick Grayson then reclaimed his own unique, distinct superhero mantle of Nightwing. So again, I don't hate Dick Grayson as Batman so long as the story is in a way that is, first of all, makes sense in context and is respectful to both the characters of Batman and Dick Grayson in the incredible amount of history between them, right? And again, as for Mayday, I don't read Spider-Man enough to know who she is outside of the daughter of Peter and I would assume Mary Jane, and they named her after Aunt May, right? So when it comes to Dick, I don't have a problem. And again, Batman Beyond is one of the best examples of how to move a mantle onto a new person with respect. Taking a character like X-23, right? Taking a character like X-23, who was introduced in X-Men Evolution, whose whole character for the longest time was about her, uh, huh? Consider turning down video. What? Sorry. Anyway, as I was saying, her whole character for the longest was about her forging her own identity, actually separate from men, separate from Logan. There was even in I think it was in the comics. I think there was an issue in the comics where he specifically says to her that he doesn't want her um, living a life of violence and pain as he has, right? He doesn't want her following in his footsteps. He doesn't want another Wolverine in the world, right? He's there. He knows how terrible it is to actually live his life, and he thinks it's more than enough, right? But a lot of her stories has been about her emancipation, her breaking away from being Logan's clone, right? And then in the comics, right, breaking away from being raised to be a killer, and the whole trigger scent thing, and her, if I remember correctly, she was a prostitute for a time, and so a lot of her story has actually been about her, uh, you know, again having a lot of those Wolverine characteristics, feral, savage, violent, deadly, but actually actively trying to walk away from all of that, as opposed to Logan, who has sort of come to a begrudging acceptance of who he is and what he is, and he sort of, as much as he may not personally like it, especially his berserker rages, he leans into it. He embraces it as much as he may personally hate it, because he does see how his violence can actually contribute in a positive way, despite the incredible amount of pain it causes him, right? Whereas with Laura, she was actually trying to lead a much more peaceful existence than he's ever had. There was even a time, I don't think it lasted, but there was even a time when she was a martial pacifist, right? And there's her story actually has a lot in common with Cassie Kane at DC Comics, which makes sense because Cassie is more or less DC's version of X-23. But anyway, right, both of those characters have a story about breaking away from their parents, right? Laura in time breaks away from Wolverine, and she breaks away from the violent legacy she was born into, being a clone and all that stuff. And Cassie, breaks away from Lady Shiva and Richard Kane, I think his name is, or David Kane, one of them, and the violent legacy she was born into. Right? They both aspired to be more than just savage, murderous killers. Right? And they took on their own names and their own mantles in time. And again, like with what's her face, uh, Cassie Kane, right? Yeah, she's held legacy mantles like, say, Batgirl. Okay, fine. Like nearly every woman in the Bat family will be Batgirl at least once, right? But with Cassie, she's also been orphaned. She's also had a bunch of different names, and again, she's had her own stories dealing with her own issues. She's not treated as discount Barbara Gordon number 3, right? She's treated as her own person, and that's all I want for any of these characters, regardless of their gender or their age or which company they come from or whatnot. I want Cassie Kane to become an iconic character in her own right. I want Laura Kinney to become an iconic character in her own right. Right? It's I'm not the problem here. At least I don't think I am. Right? It's not me. It's the comic book industry that literally wants to hold these female characters down and hold them in these legacy titles. And it's not just Cassie. It's not just Laura. It's characters like Kamala Khan. I wish Kamala Khan had her own freaking name. Call her Jersey Girl, right? That was not tied to Captain Marvel. She's literally using a white woman's old hero name. Why can't Kamala Khan be her own woman, right? Like, has she ever even met Dust of the X-Men? Like, have they ever actually put her, like, in connection with a Muslim superhero? No. They act like Dust doesn't exist, because of course they're gonna act like Dust doesn't exist, because Dust was a creation of Ethan Van Sciver, and Ethan is pretty much persona non grata, right? But all she is, right, is again just this. And then literally, Kamala's character starts out as a fangirl. I don't necessarily think that's the best of origins, but it's like when are they gonna build from that? Okay, she had a falling out with Carol over the events of Civil War II. That was good, right? Never meet your heroes, especially since Carol was most assuredly the villain in that story. And then what happens, right? As soon as that story is over and they need to redeem Carol's character again because of the at the time upcoming Captain Marvel film back in 2019, what do? They totally reverse course, try to make Carol heroic again, and have Kamala just swooning over her like a fangirl all over again. Why? Why? Why can't she grow out of her fangirl worship of Carol Danvers? Why must she keep holding on to a name that was never hers? Why can't she have her own name, have her own adventures completely separate from Captain Marvel, right? Think of it like music, right? A lot of artists are inspired by the artists that they grew up listening to, but not too many of them end up joining that band. Sometimes they do, but a lot of the time they don't. They go on and they make their own band. They become a star in their own right. So again, why can't that be done for Laura or for Cassie or for Kamala Khan or for Kate Bishop or for plenty of other characters? Why can't She-Hulk be glorious and beautiful and sensational and not Brucette Banner? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Get these characters into the hands of good writers, good artists who are actually invested in telling their stories, and let them be great. Let them stand on their own while still being connected to their legacy character. You don't have to like just totally cut the cord, but by God, let them grow and stand on their own 2 feet. And someone, please, adjust Kamala's design so that she's no longer wearing that stupid scarf around her throat. Even Carol eventually moved the scarf to her hips. You know why? Because if you wear a scarf around your throat as a superhero, people are going to yank on it and choke you. Do you want her to end up like Isadora Duncan? Because that's how you end up as Isadora Duncan. It drives me nuts. But anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day or night wherever you are. Bye.